For the Israelis, the root of all evil runs through those alleged tunnels below it. For Palestinians, Al-Shifa hospital is a violated sanctuary, the symbol of civilian suffering. After claiming Hamas was running operations out of the Gaza Strip's largest medical facility, Israeli forces overnight carrying what it calls a precise and targeted operation in a specified area of Al-Shifa, end quote. We'll ask about the raid and the international condemnation. We'll ask how sensitive belligerents are to outside pressure. In the case of Israel, it's approved the first diesel fuel delivery in 40 days of war to UN agencies in Gaza. And we'll ask about the toll of 6 weeks of war, not just on Gaza, not just on the West Bank and on Israel, but on all those who work on Mideast policy. In the US, there's open divisions within the civil service. And here in France, pushback from sitting ambassadors who've written a diplomatic cable calling for a more balanced and clear policy. What if it's another 40 days of war? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the raid on Al-Shifa. With us from Tel Aviv, he's himself a retired ambassador, Alan Pinkis, advisor to former Israeli Prime Ministers Shimon Peres and Ehud Barak. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Good to be with you again.
From Ramallah, Bushra Khidi, policy lead at the British charity Oxfam. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael Newman is Director of Studies at Doctors Without Borders Center for Research on Humanitarian Action and Studies, aka MSF Crash.
Thank you.
Your think tank, in other words.
It is the MSF think tank based in Paris.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for
And thanks as well to retired Ambassador Jean-Yves Berthaud. Your postings included Afghanistan and Pakistan, and dealing with those who are branded terrorists at times. And you've been watching how the optics of all this is playing out. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Your reactions on the hashtag F24debate. Ever since Hamas's October 7th attack, Israel warned it was coming after besieging Al-Shifa for several days with tanks, soldiers moving in overnight. More on that story with Charlotte Hawkins.
Dar al-Shifa, or House of Healing in Arabic. As the largest and most extensive medical complex in the Strip, it's the heartbeat of Gaza. But for Israeli authorities, it's Hamas's main command center.
Based on intelligence information and an operational necessity, IDF forces are carrying out a precise and targeted operation against Hamas in a specified area in the Shifa hospital.
Both Israel and the United States have said Hamas militants were using Gaza's hospitals to hide command posts and hostages, using underground tunnels that stretch for hundreds of kilometres. It's a claim the group has repeatedly denied.
Shifa is a hospital that is older than the occupation itself, and it houses the sick and the injured, and doctors and nurses, and also houses displaced children, women and the elderly. The arrival of the occupation's tanks to Shifa is not an achievement. Shifa is a medical and civilian building and not a military site.
The site is located in the north of the Strip and used to house British Army barracks. It became a hospital in 1946 and has been a lifeline for Gazans, notably through the Arab-Israeli wars of 1948, 1967 and 1973. Like all hospitals in the Strip, Israel's siege on Gaza has meant doctors are working in extreme conditions, lacking oxygen, water and fuel. This doctor is standing in what used to be the hospital's ICU unit.
Here, as you can see, instead of the patients being connected to the devices to save their life, we've had to evacuate the area completely, as you can see. The paramedics were forced to evacuate this department to save people from Israeli airstrikes and sniping.
Al-Shifa Hospital has a capacity of 700, but Doctors Without Borders says the number of patients there is currently in the thousands, with hundreds more just waiting to be admitted. With ongoing bombardment, it's unclear whether Al-Shifa will withstand the war.
Michael Newman, have you had any word from Al-Shifa this Wednesday?
Yeah, we have a colleague working, a doctor working in Al-Shifa still. We talked to him this morning, and he described the situation that your journalist accounted for: cadavers in the courtyard of the hospital, no electricity, no food, no water. thousands of displaced actually who have sought shelter in the hospital. And who are also now being attacked by the Israeli
Did your
army.
colleagues see the Israeli operation unfold?
We know that when people have trying to exit the premises of the hospital, they've been shot at by snipers. That's what we know. We know that there's been fighting around the hospital, and that's what I can say at this stage.
Was it quiet when he spoke to you?
No, it was not. It's not. It's extremely complicated. Also, the connections are very poor, very bad. So when you speak to one of our colleagues, you never know when you are going to be able to speak to him next. So everything is very, very unstable. People are very shaken by what they encounter, by what they actually see, the working environment, the number of wounded that are just in the corridors of the hospital. The lack of virtually everything. There is nothing. There is no water. There is no electricity. We have a few colleagues that have sought shelter in our guest houses and office that are, of course, empty. And they witnessed 2 days ago that their location were shot at by Israeli. And we have tried to evacuate these people who are also short of food and water, but to no avail for now. So the whole area is besieged and under heavy artillery and fire.
All right, before we continue, let's cross to our correspondent, Iris Mockler, who joins us from Jerusalem. Iris, before I ask you about why Al-Shifa is a target, have you any word, because we're getting contradictory word in the last hour. One of the news agencies was reporting that the operation was over. The others are not, from what I can see. What have you heard? What's the very latest you've heard?
The very latest I've heard, I haven't heard Israeli media on this. I'm relying on foreign media, and I, like you, have seen varying reports. When I last looked at 3 hours ago, the operation was still ongoing. Since then, I've heard one report saying it's not, but the rest saying it still is. Now, and that would make it, Francois, more than 12 hours.
More than 12 hours. Again, Al-Shifa, we have talked about it, you and I, a lot over the last 40 days. It comes up often in conversation. It came up in conversation during previous conflicts between Israel and Hamas.
Yes, it did. And it's always been an Israeli assertion and contention that there is a Hamas presence beneath that hospital, and that it's a command and control center, sometimes for very people who are very high up in the Hamas leadership. What we have heard so far is that they have found weapons there, no Hamas leaders and no hostages, but they have found weapons. We haven't seen that. They haven't shown it to us unless that's happening right now as we speak. Up till now, I haven't been able to see that with my own eyes, anything that I could verify. I did, however, speak to a doctor who I've spoken to before. And he was here 2 years ago. He's a British specialist. He doesn't want to say his name because he doesn't want to endanger any of the colleagues that he was with. He was 3 months in Gaza and the West Bank, and he was quite a lot of time at Shifa and another hospital in Gaza. And he contacted me again within the last few days just to see how I was. And then he reminded me of his experiences in Shifa, and I decided that I would record some of what he said because it is interesting to hear a perspective of an outsider and one who is safe enough to speak. I think you might have that. Should we have a listen to what he had to say?
The main point was when I was first asked to work there, I was told there was a part of the hospital I was not to go near, and if I did, I'd be in danger of being shot.
Shot? You mean actually shot with a gun?
Yes.
Was it explained to you why that was?
No, but implicit was that it was being used for non-medical purposes.
And did you see anything non-medical, or did you obey the instruction and stay away?
I stayed away, but I saw a few sort of dodgy-looking non-medical characters going in and out all the time. It was a ward leading to a basement. As I say, I didn't go there, so I behaved myself.
They would say there could be many other reasons that you would be told not to go to a particular area of a hospital. It's not unusual.
Well, I was welcome everywhere else. And as I say, the doctors and nurses there were very welcoming and very kind. And the hushed tones under which this was said was consistent with all the other hushed tones about which Hamas was discussed. You know, people were genuinely fearful. I cannot emphasise too much the air of collective paranoia that existed there.
So that was his perspective. He did go on to recount certain threats that were made against some doctors there. And he did also say that if they were frightened, this was, of course, before this current war, when perhaps the proportions would be different. But he did go on to say that if they were 10% frightened of a possible Israeli airstrike, they were 90% frightened of getting onto the wrong side of Hamas. He really did describe an atmosphere of fear in the Gaza Strip generally, but in the hospital as well.
Iris Makler, many thanks for joining our conversation here in the France 24 debate. Michael Newman, have you discussed at MSF Al-Shifa and what's inside of it with your staff?
What's inside? I mean, we've been working in Al-Shifa for a long time. We've been working in Gaza for like over 2 decades.
So what's your reaction to that eyewitness account there?
I mean, honestly, we don't know. What we know is that there was never any evidence that the hospital was used for any other purposes than purely medical purposes. What is also true is that, you know, war crimes might be committed on both sides, but for no reason, the hospital should be attacked the way it is. I mean, hospitals should be protected for legal reasons, for moral reasons, and whatever the hospital is being used right now, this is a place where you have patients, babies, wounded people, and they should be spared from the violence. This is the most important message that we have now. This hospital, as many others, are being routinely attacked, and this is not acceptable at all.
Alan Pinkis, do you agree?
Well, it's complicated. If it were up to me, hospitals would be off limits, irrespective of what's beneath them. On the other hand, what is beneath them is vile and deadly and explosive. So apparently, from a tactical, operational point of view, there was no choice but to go into those tunnels because they lead into other tunnels. There are munition stockpiles, gasoline stockpiles, Hamas command and control centers. And this is a labyrinth of tunnels. Again, I would put hospitals, I would place hospitals completely off limits, but militarily there was no choice but to go in there.
Because has it been confirmed what has been recovered inside of there? So far, we don't know. We're just getting a briefing right now, the Israeli military saying that the operation is still ongoing.
Yeah, well, you know, I've seen some of the pictures, I've seen some of the footage, rather, of what was found underneath the hospital in the basement and underneath the basement in that tunnel system that they have built. So I can attest to the veracity of these reports. Notwithstanding, if it were up to me, I would still, you know, I'm repeating this, I would still stay away from the hospital.
Let me ask you, Bushra Khidi, listening to that eyewitness account from earlier, what are your thoughts on what's unfolded this Wednesday?
I mean, of course, the international law and as part of our mandate at Oxfam, we point to international law, and international law is clear. Hospitals are not meant to be used as nor military bases, nor should they be attacked, and both those amount to war crimes under international law. However, we had up to 70,000 internally displaced people sheltering at Al-Shifa. We have 39 preemies, little babies that were taken out of incubators because there's no more electricity and no more water at Al-Shifa. And I would say that there's also the principle of proportionality in international law. And that's what we need to be looking at and discussing. Is it proportionate to bomb near a hospital, at the entrance of a hospital, ambulances, healthcare workers, in order to investigate this potential military target, which we still are not clear whether there is evidence. Nobody has yet seen evidence, so I can't.
Well, I can just read you. I can just read you what the Israeli military is saying. This has just come in on the news wires, according to the Reuters news agency, saying soldiers found an operational command center, technological assets belonging to Hamas, and that the intelligence information recovered is being assessed. This is, of course, according to Israel's military.
Again, I would speak to the humanitarian situation. I am speaking on what we're seeing on the ground with people that are hungry, people that don't have bathrooms to go to, people are spending hours to find food or water, 2.2 million people who have been collectively punished for actions of Hamas that are condemned by the international community in its entirety. I would say that violence begets violence. This is the sixth escalation in Gaza because of tunnels and potential military targets the Israeli forces and the IDF are looking for. But also, Israel has held Gaza under tight military blockade for the last 16 years that is deemed illegal under international law and constitute collective punishment. And I would say that there needs to be another way. We must, have a ceasefire and for real negotiations to take place and a real political solution to be sought by the international community with the support of the international community and with the help of the international community. That is what needs to happen. Because right now we're at almost 12,000 fatalities, 6,500 children have been killed for, military targets that I understand need to be found by Israel, but the collateral damage is so epic that it's an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, and we have 2.2 million people affected.
Yeah, the UN's World Health Organization calling the raid totally unacceptable. Arab states have condemned. And we've gotten, Jean-Yves Berthaud, some strong wording from the French Foreign Ministry. Paris expressing its deep concern over the overnight operation at Al-Shifa hospital. A little later in that statement, the Palestinian population should not have to pay for the crimes of Hamas. Strong wording. Do French diplomats know something that we don't?
Well, no. I mean, that has been the preoccupation, the concern of French diplomacy since the very beginning, in reality. Although there has been this move on the part of the president when he visited Jerusalem and when he declared that he suggested that there would be a coalition based upon what had been done against ISIS. An international coalition against Hamas. So at that time, everybody was quite surprised, including...
He rolled it back quickly.
Yes, indeed. And so, but at the same time, to be honest, he had not ignored the absolute necessity of a humanitarian attitude and respect of international law and international war laws. But that, of course, sort of disappeared because of the extraordinary announcement that he had made, which was withdrawn.
Because here the statement is very clear-cut, isn't it?
It is clear-cut. Well, of course, we have to take into account, well, first of all, that, I mean, this country is very attached to international law and also humanitarian matters. At the same time, we have a population, a very large Arab population, the largest in Europe. We also have the largest Israeli population, Jewish population in Europe. We have to take into account the necessity to save lives everywhere that is possible.
Yeah, Emmanuel Macron's call for a ceasefire, which he did in an interview last Friday with the BBC, was welcomed by a group of at least a dozen French ambassadors who sent a diplomatic cable calling for a return to a Mideast position that's less all-in behind Israel. As reported in Le Figaro on Tuesday, the private note complains of solo policymaking by the president. It catches the diplomatic corps wrong-footed and stirs anti-French sentiment in the Arab world or in the wider Muslim world?
Well, France does not enjoy the same reputation it used to have in the Arab world as a reliable partner that could be an honest broker, etc. But that is not the fault of President Macron. There has been a shift after Chirac. I mean, the policy, the diplomatic stand of France after Chirac has been a bit more favorable to Israel than it used to be before. Everybody remembers, the outcry of Chirac in Jerusalem when he was a bit pressured by security services and the reactions that ensued. So nowadays, I think we reckon that this situation is no longer tolerable. The amount of suffering of the Palestinian population in Gaza is no longer acceptable. It seems, and France is not the only country expressing this concern. A number of other Western countries, and without talking about the Arab countries themselves, are becoming very vocal about it nowadays.
Michael Neumann, how do you read France's stance through these 40 days?
I need glasses to read it. I'm puzzled. It's confusing, in fact. As it's been said, there's been, direction. It's been taking direction and then U-turns. You've mentioned Emmanuel Macron's interview to the BBC, and on the next day he went to apologize to the Israeli president. So it's pretty hard to see how consistent that policy is vis-à-vis.
He didn't quite apologize. He clarified.
Well, that's the diplomatic language to say that basically he withdrew some of his comments that were actually very harsh, and which would have been welcome if followed up with consistent goals.
So what would you like to hear him say?
Well, I think what we need to say now, very, very clearly, and that has to come first from the US also, is stop the massacre. There is no question that the Israeli government and state is allowed to pursue that military operation because it's getting the support of the US and most of the Western states and countries. And I think that until that support is being withdrawn, those images and horrendous situation that we've been describing since the beginning of the show here will continue.
Yeah, it's not just France, where Middle East policy is under scrutiny. Tuesday saw a big pro-Israel rally on the Mall in Washington. It came the same day, though, that more than 500 U.S. civil servants, including political appointees, sent the U.S. president a letter calling for a redress of the Biden administration's policy. That's on top of an open letter signed by more than 1,000 employees of the U.S. Agency for International Development. And even when Joe Biden travels to San Francisco for an Asia-Pacific summit, he's dogged by a march. This time, some 500 demonstrators Tuesday evening chanting "Ceasefire now," the reminders which started for the U.S. president back in Washington when he welcomed his Indonesian counterpart to the Oval Office.
Indonesia appealed to the U.S. to do more to stop the atrocities in Gaza. Ceasefire is a must for the sake of humanity. Once again, thank you for your invitation, President Biden. Thank you.
Now, Alan Pinkis, Joko Widodo is not just anybody. He's the president of the world's most populous Muslim nation. Those calls, that pressure, is Israel feeling them?
Israel is. I can't speak for the government of Israel. And apparently these are two distinct entities. Joko Widodo, by the way, has been extraordinarily friendly to Israel in a very subdued and informal way for many, many years. And I would hope, even though I don't believe it'll happen, but I do hope that the Israeli government heed what he said and at least engage with him. Yeah, it is. Look, it is being felt. And Israel obviously and naturally is looking first and foremost to developments in public opinion in the U.S. And in the U.S., there have been several successive compatible polls that indicate a steep decline, despite the rally in Washington that you just referred to. There have been polls and surveys indicating a steep decline in the support for Israel. Above, I'm talking public opinion, not just letters signed by administration or former administration officials. So I would hope that Israel is listening to what is happening in the U.S., what Indonesia is saying, what President Macron is saying, and I think that, you know, even though Israel has this, well, Mr. Netanyahu at least has this intransigent, defiant bravado about him, in a week or in 2 weeks, the gravitas is going to be such that he will have to heed these remarks and advice.
Because that brings us back to what we were talking about at the outset, Alan Pinkis, which is they had talked about Al-Shifa for several weeks now as a command center, and we're going to know more in the coming hours about what the Israeli military claims to have found inside of it. After that, what?
Well, okay, so that's been the big question from the outset. I think that the Biden administration, as well as other countries, but primarily the Biden administration, has been demanding from Israel a clear, even though, not necessarily a detailed or elaborate or coherent plan, but a vision. What and how do you see Gaza the day after? Okay, you went into Gaza, you attacked with 3 divisions, with massive aerial bombardments, you went into the tunnels, you went underneath Shifa, we supported you, we backed you, but there has to be a political objective which is aligned or dictates these military means. Because if there is a total annihilation or elimination of Hamas, militarily at least, they may maintain residual political power. What next? So after 2 weeks of American pressure, Netanyahu 3 days ago finally gave out a statement, which was a one-line, bland statement about the Palestinian Authority will not govern Gaza. And after Hamas, we will make sure indefinitely that there's no other Hamas. Okay, I don't know what that means. I do know that it is in direct opposition to what the Americans have in mind, which is an international force, an interim, temporary international force that would somehow govern Gaza on a build, operate, transfer, BOT basis, after which the Palestinian Authority will go in. But that's not going to happen if Israel maintains a military presence inside Gaza. The Palestinian Authority won't consent to that. No one will. So you're asking me about the day after. I wish I had a better answer for you.
So from what you're saying, Alan Pinkis, the Israeli Prime Minister, who's in a coalition with the Messianic far right, is not going to budge because his political survival depends on not budging.
I'll go even farther than that. I think he's setting a confrontation. He's deliberately setting a course for a confrontation with the Biden administration, whom he will then blame, conceivably, arguably, who he will then blame for holding him back on the precipice of a historic and game-changing victory. Yes, you see the divergence of ideas and of interests between Israel and the U.S.
And does everybody inside of his party agree with him? Is there a moment where someone inside of Likud stands up and goes to tell him that, no, you can't do this anymore?
No, there isn't. It's a cult. I'm sorry to say so. No, there isn't.
So at this point in time, Bushra Khidi, what is the way forward?
I mean, the first step is an immediate ceasefire. Palestine has been under military occupation for more than 56 years. It is abundantly clear that military force cannot resolve this conflict. The international community has a role, and it must now now is the time to work effectively with the parties to reach a ceasefire that lasts through addressing the violation, addressing the impunity. This is years of impunity where, no accountability have been held.
So, Bushra, that's what you're demanding. What are you expecting, though, from countries like the United States and France? What do you see Joe Biden as capable of doing?
We see a real peace process that is impermeated international law and human rights and towards a just solution, as has been the position of the United States until now. A just and negotiated solutions for both Palestinian and Israelis that achieve equal rights for both people. Whatever that looks like, that is not up to me to say. That is up to the parties and the international community that is negotiating that with the parties. But what I can say is that without justice, without accountability, and with complete impunity, this is only going to continue to an actual demise of a situation. And what we have seen so far is we have been saying that Gaza has been on the brink. It is now on the brink. We're talking about years of recovery. And the international community, including the United States and the UK and all members of the United Nations Security Council, to really support a real effort, a real plan for a real peace process. This is now the moment.
Michael Neumann, there was a humanitarian aid conference that took place last Thursday in Paris. What were your thoughts come after that?
There was some promises.
Was it just a photo op, or were they trying to work on a plan for the day after?
There was no plan to work on the day after at that conference. It was a humanitarian conference, and the objective of it was to get some money and to see how we could organize assistance right now, see how assistance can actually cross Rafah, for instance. The day after was really not at the agenda. I think that actually this is the priority. We need to have these people survived.
Israel this Wednesday, by the way, saying that it's going to lift limits on the number of vehicles, aid trucks that can cross over from Egypt into Gaza.
Okay, good news. We'll see what comes. I mean, for now, there was a first convoy of transporting fuel, but the Israeli put limit on how the fuel would be used, and they said it would only be used for transportation and not for the hospital use, for instance, to produce electricity. So I think for now we are at the very beginning of efforts that may be more interesting to observe and alleviate the suffering that we observe. But as it was said, we have like 2.5 million people, 2/3 of whom have been displaced or are in a very, very precarious situation, have very little access to very basic needs, and it needs more than a few truckloads here and there. I mean, let's remember that until like October 6th, there were between 300 and 500 trucks a day entering the Gaza Strip to cover all the needs of the population, who's been besieged by Israel for a much, much longer period than the 6 weeks that we are mentioning here.
There is a U.S. envoy that's back in the region. Brett McGurk is his name. He met earlier with Israel's defense minister, ostensibly top of the agenda, working on the liberation of hostages held by Hamas. And we were saying, for nearly 2 weeks now, we've been saying, Jean-Yves Berthaud, there could be some kind of a deal to free more of those hostages that are in Gaza. It hasn't happened. Because diplomacy is a lot about negotiating behind closed doors. But your thoughts on the fact that we're not seeing any concrete results?
Well, it's very tricky, in fact, because of course the strategy of Hamas is to gain time by promising to release a few hostages here and there, and then of course the other party through Qatar and other intermediaries are proposing to increase the number, and so of course the Hamas is trying to gain time in order to save a number of the main chiefs of the party. But of course nobody falls in that trap. But the more time is lost, the more worrying it is. And that is also why, in a way, the position of Israel trying to go on with the military solution is understandable, although it is absolutely tragic for both parties.
Is Israel fallen into a trap? Because from what you're saying, Hamas is all the time in the world.
Yeah, but it doesn't make Hamas more respectable after what they did.
I understand, but my question is
but what happened?
Hamas has the stronger bargaining chip, is what you're saying?
Well, in fact, who I think has the strongest bargaining chip are the Palestinians in general, because the world sympathy is coming and is growing and in favor of the Palestinians. A peace prospect cannot be envisaged with the actual protagonists of the situation. We do not imagine the Hamas negotiating with the government of Mr. Netanyahu, and Mr. Netanyahu and his extremists cannot either have a legitimacy to negotiate anything. So it is the time of war, but it is also the time of thinking for peace. But a peace that unfortunately has to be prepared and thought of, but will not be negotiated by these two particular parties. So what I think is at stake at the moment is to try and imagine what could be done in Israel in order to favor a coalition of more like-minded people who would be concerned not only with peace in the region, reconciliation with the Palestinians, but concerned with the security of Israel, because without the settlement and the creation of two states in Israel, Israel will never have security.
Is there that realization, Alan Pinkis? Has public opinion changed in these 40 days? When you first spoke with us in the opening days of this conflict, you were saying right now that public opinion in Israel was all about revenge. Is it still the case 40 days on?
It is. It is very likely about revenge. The polls show complete and utter distrust and lack of confidence in Mr. Netanyahu and his incompetent government. But that said, I don't think anyone in Israel at this point, I emphasize, will entertain anything about a political process in the aftermath of Gaza. Right now, it's about annihilating, eliminating, eradicating, obliterating. You find a synonym that you like, Hamas. And even talk of a Palestinian Authority involvement has a lot of people skeptical and worried. But that, I believe, will change in the few months after this war is somehow declared over.
A few months. Ehud Barak, this was a week and a half ago, was saying that Israel had at most 2 to 3 weeks before international pressure became too big.
No. Ehud Barak is right, and I think the same way as he does, not only because I worked for him and with him, but because he's right. No. The military operation is 2-3 weeks, tops. Months after the war, in which the Israeli public will politically begin to fathom, entertain, consider political options on the Palestinian issue. I did not mean months in terms of the war.
So let's follow your thinking all the way through here. Okay. If that's the case, then isn't it even more in the interest of Hamas to hold on to those hostages, to keep it radicalized?
Well, to be honest, I don't know what goes through their heads. We're talking about messianic, fundamentalist, lunatic, murderous terrorists. So to assume, to ascribe any kind of rational thinking, I can't. I mean, some people do. And by the way, most of those people thought that Hamas has been deterred, and Hamas is risk averse, and Hamas is inclined toward political accommodation. Then came October 7th. So even the Hamas experts should take a hard look at the depth of or the quality of their understanding of Hamas. Hamas cannot hold much more. But here's the thing. Here's the catch, and here's where your question is on the money. We all talk about Gaza, but there's a Hamas presence in the West Bank. Hamas as an ideology, not necessarily as a militia, exists in the West Bank and is gaining strength, number one. Number two, in order to declare a win, all Hamas needs to do is to stand on their feet, as opposed to Israel that needs to prove that Hamas was annihilated. And in that respect, no one is going to get a win here, which is why, yeah, you're right. Hamas has an interest in prolonging this and extending this. In Gaza, they won't be able to because they are on the verge of complete destruction. But that doesn't mean that Hamas as an idea, as an ideology, has been defeated indefinitely. Quite the contrary. You thought you beat Iraq. You thought you beat, not you being the world. You thought you beat Al-Qaeda, and then one day pops up something called ISIS. We thought we beat Amal in South Lebanon. The next day there's Hezbollah. So you never know. They morph into different political entities.
Bushra Khidi, you heard both Alan Pinkis and Jean-Yves Berthaud stress that when cooler heads do eventually prevail, the Palestinian Authority could be at the center of things. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, I can't comment on this. There's, we call on, all parties to really enter a dialogue for reunification and Palestinian unity.
Because you heard Jean-Yves Berthaud say that the dialogue's not going to happen with Hamas. So it's got to be with the Palestinian Authority.
I mean, it has to be through some parties, through some, third-party entity. But there's, as humanitarians and from our analysis of working in the ground for the last 50 years, with an occupation of 57 years that really denies major rights for Palestinians, including myself. I am personally affected by occupation. I have family in Gaza. We need a solution that addresses these injustices, including a real political process for Palestinians as well. And it's something that we should be looking forward to, and it's something that we advocate for here locally, but also at the international level with our international counterparts. A peace process now is unfathomable, but dialogue through trusted partners and inclusive dialogue that includes women and refugees and that includes civil society, I think is critical once we have a ceasefire.
Michael Newman, is that your thinking as well?
I mean, those are very positive thoughts, and I wish they were actually practical and possible. And I do support the process as my colleague is just doing and describing, no question now. The reality is that, the Hamas has been dehumanizing the Jews, that Israel authorities, government, representative have been dehumanizing the Palestinians for years and years, treating them as animals. That has created a mindset that is pretty detrimental to the process that has been just described right now. I think there is a moment of pause, not only a ceasefire and a humanitarian pause, but just of thinking and realizing that unless the question, as also was just mentioned, the question of occupation is really on the table. And not speaking about a peace process in the abstract, but speaking about the roots of that, the occupation of West Bank, the situation in Gaza. Unless this is on the table, there will be no dialogue, nothing possible. And I don't see right now, as Mr. Ambassador was just mentioning, any space for that discussion to happen in Israel. So hopefully there will be in a few months or years from now, the possibility for such a dialogue to open. But right now, I'm
oh dear, Alan Pinkis is saying months, Michael Newman is saying years. We'll leave it at that before it gets to be decades with Jean-Yves Berthaud. But thank you very much for joining us. I want to thank as well Alan Pinkis in Tel Aviv, Bushra Khidi in Ramallah for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.